Good afternoon. Welcome to the Great Return, Strategies for a Safe Return to Work, Church, and School. Good afternoon. My name is Joselle Booker. I am here to introduce the facilitator to this afternoon session. Our facilitator this afternoon is David McKinney. David McKinney is the Vice President of Government, Public and Community Relations and Customer Satisfaction for AutoZone. He began his work with AutoZone in 2019. David has a long history of public service and work in this community. He is a lawyer by trade. He began his career with Birch, Porter & Johnson. He concentrated in municipal law, employment law, and business litigation. He went on to work for the governor of Tennessee back in 2012. He's remained active in the civic and business communities. He currently serves on the board of directors of both the California and Texas Retailers Association. He also serves as the government affairs committees for Auto Care Association and the Retail Industry Leaders Association. He serves on the Tennessee Governor's Council for Judicial Appointments, the Tennessee Financial Literacy Commission, the Board of Directors for New Memphis Institute, Board of Directors for Memphis in May, and most recently, the Board of Directors of the MMBC Continuum. David is married to Dr. Shanae McKinney, and they have a 3-year-old son. I am so happy to present to you this afternoon, David McKinney, as a facilitator for your afternoon session. David.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Joselle. Gosh, I'm starting to feel old now. You know, coming up, I remember the long introduction. I suspect the older you may be, so I'm starting to feel a little old. Well, welcome everybody. This is a critically important and timely topic as we talk about the Great Return. And Joselle has asked me to say just a few words before I turn it over to the panelists. I suspect in some ways I'm the opening act to these headliners here, and we're in for a treat. But when you think about AutoZone, gosh, just everywhere, we were all forced because of the pandemic to make tough decisions and real sacrifices. Many of us have referred to this time as the most interesting times. You think about the impact on supply chains, customers, employees. For us, that's AutoZoners. You know, some of the things when you think about the Great Return, but throughout the pandemic, we tried to use a few guiding principles. One is we had to actively make the decision as to whether we keep our doors open, even as an essential business. And that was an active decision, and it wasn't one to take lightly. The second, which is probably at the top, right up under health and safety, is, you know, financial liquidity. You know, are you able to perform financially the way that you can to keep those doors open and to meet the demands of customers? And three, as you think about making near-term decisions, how do those decisions ultimately play out long-term? So there were a number of decisions that we had to make, a number of guiding principles. The reality is that the pandemic was global. So the decisions in the US looked a little bit different than the tactical decisions in Mexico, and it looked a little bit different in Puerto Rico and in the West and all parts of the globe where we receive product and service our customers. So, you know, it certainly is the defining moment, and many would agree the defining moment of our generation. Our hope is that we are the best days are still ahead, and the worst is behind us. All right, so that's enough from me. I don't want to overtalk it. I want these esteemed panelists, and I got a couple of bios here, and what I'm going to do is read some of the bio, but I want to take the liberty to ad-lib a little bit because I know these two distinguished panelists and guests personally. I'll start off with Rodney Rowan. Rodney, much like me, is a proud graduate of the Memphis City School System. He spent 24 years in teaching and administrative experience. He was a principal at Westwood Elementary and Cherokee Elementary School, where he led them off of the Tennessee priorities list, both consistently achieving double-digit gains in reading, language, arts, science, and mathematics. Presently, Rodney serves as the assistant superintendent to the continuous improvement zone of the Shelby County Schools. You know, you think about Rodney, he's not only a doctoral student, so we could go Dr. Rowan today, but he's not only a doctoral student at the University of Memphis, he's truly redefined the idea of student achievement all around, but particularly in the urban city of Memphis. You know, I had the pleasure of meeting Rodney first a few years back with our work with new leaders, and you will be hard pressed to find someone not only as passionate, I think passion is a word that's often used to describe Rodney, but who is insightful, caring, knowledgeable, takes a very practical, common sense approach to moving the needle when it comes to his students, administrators, parents, and those in the communities that he serves. We are in for a big treat today to have Rodney. Rodney, welcome. Thank you. All right, next, and certainly not last or least, we have Pastor Rufus Smith. Pastor Smith is a senior pastor for Hope Church in Memphis. He joined the staff in 2010 and became senior pastor in 2013. The church, my church, is a believer-centered but unchurch friendly. Over the past 9 years, Hope has transitioned from a predominantly Caucasian to multi-ethnic, multi-generational congregation with over, get this, 33 members being African-American. Pastor Smith has founded the Christian Pastors Network, an ethnically and denominationally diverse clergy-only network, building trust and broadening the impact, having, and this is what I love, candid conversation and collaboration to close the economic disparity gap among under-resourced citizens of Memphis for over the past 10 years. Here's my ad lib. So aside from Pastor Smith being my pastor, you know, during the depths of a lot of the civil unrest, which is still taking place and issues that will never completely be resolved, Pastor Smith rolled up his sleeves and partnered with the Memphis Chamber. I was so pleased to see him involved in the work with Protest to Progress, to have those candid and critical discussions as we think about not just tomorrow, but down the future for this community and those we serve. Pastor Smith, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get going. I got some great questions here. Rodney, the first one's for you. Talk about SCS's Return Stronger plan to keep students and staff safe, and what parents and communities should know about that program.
Thank you, David. So as you know, March 13th, 2020, school as we once knew it, it changed, and students were forced to learn virtually. Through that process, we were able to successfully implement a one-to-one device initiative, meaning that 100% of the students in Shelby County school system, they have devices. So we began with online teaching and learning. Around February, March of this year, 2021, we opened the doors of the school. At that time, we had 70 students, 70% of our students remained at home, learning at home virtually, but 30% of our students returned to the building. We're now in a space where we are prepared. Around, I think it's August the 9th, 100% of our students will come back in person. With that being said, we are going to closely adhere to CDC guidelines. 100% of our students will be required to wear a mask. Teachers will wear masks. We will have hand sanitizing stations in all of our school buildings, and we will also provide students with bottled water. Here's an additional plug. As of today, we've had 70% of our parents to register our students. So we reimagined the 901, and we're truly preparing to return stronger.
I love that. Rodney, I'm gonna stick with you, and I'm going way off script. Talk to us, share with us some of the lessons learned throughout the pandemic. I know the young people are going back to school in the fall, but you all opened your doors earlier this year. Talk about some of the lessons learned throughout the pandemic with reopening.
Well, one lesson that we've learned is we've learned how to adapt, right? So we've always strived to equip our students with technology, but the pandemic really forced us to have to solely rely on technology. So our teachers and students alike have become far more technologically savvy than we ever thought that they would be. So this pandemic, it also opened up a space to where we've had what we call Memphis virtual school, where parents may elect for a child to receive their learning online. We were now forced to have to educate 100% of our children online. Throughout this pandemic, we've dealt with lots of hardships. Um, we've lost lots of students. A lot of our students, we've lost students to tragedy. We've really had time to really examine the needs of all of our children because not all learning environments and home environments were as ideal as we thought, but we learned that during the pandemic. So now we're going to be even more intentional around social and emotional learning. We're going to be more intentional around meeting all of the needs of children because we know that right now our children are really hurting. Also, with a lot of our high school students, we learned during the pandemic that a lot of our high school students had to work full-time jobs. So we that's something that we did not know. And we had to really provide them with additional learning opportunities so that they could graduate on time. So the pandemic has really taught us some of the realities that our students are facing every day. And we're now learning how to be more adaptable and adjusting to the needs of all of our students.
Very good and very well said. I'm glad to have you, Rodney, in leadership, sincerely. Well, Pastor Smith, we know that the faith-based community and Hope Church was not immune to COVID-19. Rodney mentioned technology, but talk to us about some of the protocols and technology Hope Church put into place to keep its members and visitors safe during the pandemic. Pastor Smith, I think you may be on mute.
There we are. Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. As Dr. Rowan mentioned, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, one weekend we were in person, on our normal weekend, which is about 65 to 6,800 people on a weekend. The very next weekend, we were 100% virtual. And we stayed 100% virtual for the next 5 months. During that 5 months, we put together a team called the Reopening Task Force Team that was made up of virologists, epidemiologists, pulmonologists, so medical personnel, mental health, parents of young children, empty nesters, etc. About 15 persons. And we began to really look at the science, scripture, and common sense. Those are the three things we looked at. The science from CDC, Johns Hopkins, and all of the reputable places. Scripture, our goal was to protect the least. That is, how do we create safety protocols in order to help those who were the most vulnerable, not those who were the healthiest or the strongest. And then to be able to apply common sense from a perspective of all of these different constituencies. And we decided after a couple of soft openings to reopen the last weekend in August in person. And when we did so, however, we did temperature checks. Of course, sanitation stations were plenteous. We also had physical distancing, where we would allow people to come in a few at a time and maintain not only in the auditorium or the sanctuary, but also in the foyer. We restructured our foyer so that the seating was 6 feet apart. And then when we got into the sanctuary, of course, we decided to have masks required. That did not please a lot of our members, but again, our goal was to protect those who were the most vulnerable. Vaccinations were nowhere in sight. So masks were mandated. And then every other row that would give us 6 feet, as well as 3 seats between every family unit. So that gave us 6 feet in front and 6 feet across based on what we were told. So those were the protocols that we put in place, fairly strict. But our congregation soon became accustomed. And I must say that they did a phenomenal job during the time that we imposed those.
Very good. Pastor Smith, I want to stick with you there. And Rodney, I'm going to turn to you with the same question. You mentioned your constituents and members. And when I think about not only schools, but churches, how it intersects all avenues of the community and how the audiences are different and broad. When you're navigating or contemplating the navigation of a return, how do you contemplate these different audiences from young people to elder people to, you know, the people who are extremely tied to their faith and opening? Because I would imagine that a number of the people listening have these varying audiences and constituents as well. How do you go about doing that, Pastor Smith?
Collaboration and buy-in. You have to take a team approach, and that team approach has to consist of every one of those constituencies that you mentioned. It needs to be generationally specific, ethnically specific, because as we know, the pandemic disproportionately impacted people of color. And so when you have all of these persons on a panel and in collaborative teams, then you get the widest kind of perspective, and plus you get buy-in. And when you get that kind of buy-in, then you have advocates on the ground. It's not just coming from the top, but it's also being feathered out among their friends, relatives, acquaintances, neighbors, etc. So I would say you cannot underestimate team collaboration of these constituents.
Absolutely. And believe it or not, Rodney, education is not a complete meritocracy. So if you look at balancing the interests, which could be competing at times from, you know, the teachers and students, and you've got elected officials on boards and a superintendent who probably all want the best, but a different way of going about it. How do you balance all of those interests when you start thinking about ways and protocols with respect to reopening?
That's a very good question, David. But I think what you first have to lead with is we have to put children first. Put children first. And I say that to say, and I'll take you back just a bit, around maybe May or April, the governor had a mandate around the TCAP test. The state made a decision that we had to test 80% of our children, grades 3 through 12. We had to have 80% participation rate. Now, mind you, 70% of our children were at home. They had not entered the building. Only 30% of the students are in the building. So what we did was there was a call to action. We galvanized people across different departments. We put systems in place. We communicated with parents. We incentivized children. Our teachers got behind the effort. The state's mandate was 80% participation rate on a TCAP test. Our participation rate was 92%. So 92% of our children physically came back into the building and they took the TCAP test, and we exceeded the state's goal of by 12%. Now, this did not happen without us having a courageous leader in Dr. Ray, who set a vision, assured parents that the children would be safe. And we also had relationships, right? And it happens. But I think that even Dr. Smith would agree, the Bible says that a people without a vision will perish. And a vision is nothing more than a clearly articulated path to the future. So when we start thinking about this pandemic, as egregious as it is, and as egregious as it was, behind every dark cloud, there's a silver lining. So what will we gain from this? There's something that we're going to gain from this. And I think that when we have a collective effort and we have people who buy into the vision, we're going to find the silver cloud, the silver tint behind this dark cloud. We're going to return stronger. And I truly believe that we're going to be better for it as a result of going through this pandemic.
Pastor Smith, if we were in church, somebody might be bold enough to say amen. I don't know about that.
No, you're my thunder, Dr. Rowan. David, I would also say, and of course, the schools and businesses are not immune to this. When we get all of these constituencies together and the team approach and hear everybody's perspective, we cannot underestimate the power of politics. And so we really did have to balance and be forthright and let people know we're looking at this from a scriptural point of view, not a political point of view, as this issue became quickly politicized. So you have to balance those kinds of those constituencies and competing philosophies as well.
Very good. So I would imagine that, you know, in a community as Memphis and looking at Hope Church and Shelby County Schools, particularly as we reopen as a community, some would say that Hope Church and SES has it all figured out, has it together, had it together throughout the pandemic. I want you all to peel back the curtain a little bit with the audience and talk about some of those challenges and obstacles throughout the pandemic and how you had and are overcoming them. Pastor Smith, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah. Let me be the first to say we have not figured it out. We stumbled upward and had a lot of grace from our congregation as well. Also, in collaboration with churches across the country of our size and other sizes, it helped us also to learn what not to do. For example, many of the churches who opened before we did, we took their stumbling blocks and as stepping stones. So we knew when people wanted to come back that they did not want to be rushed in like somebody called it in our team, a cattle call, rushed in and rushed out. So what we did was the team came up with this concept of creating safe spaces. They were 6 feet apart, still in the foyer. And you did release rows and people, but if they wanted to fellowship, because that's what people miss, being face to face. If they wanted to do that, they had masks on. They had to do so at a distance. And so, but at least they could be seated in a circle and still communicate one with the other. So we learned that from others who sort of had worship, but they just quickly got people in, quickly got people out without there being any kind of talking or fellowship. That's one of the things that we learned as far as that's concerned. We also learned not to open too fast. It took us 5 months, even though people were getting restless. It took us an entire 5 months really to even start soft openings because we did not want to come back too fast. As we learned around the country, some people did do that. I'm talking about churches. And with respect to that, they became super spreaders. We certainly did not want that to do. But again, we learned from listening to people and we avoided some of those mistakes.
Rodney, what about you and the schools, SCS in particular? Talk about some of the lessons, and not only just the lessons, but I think particularly as we looked at some of those discussions with SES being played out publicly, some of the solutions that the district was able to find as well as lessons.
Well, I know one thing that we did when the pandemic initially kind of became public and we were in the midst of the pandemic, we were forced to have to communicate more. So we would have cross-functional teams 2 to 3 times a week. And we had people from every division and every department within our SES organization at the table, and we were all collaborating around how we could best serve students who were still at home, and then how we could best put systems in place so that when students returned, we would be able to optimize our time when students returned. So one thing was really the communication piece, the collaboration piece. I see we have Dr. Lowe that's online with us as well. And he is like he's our equity officer. And Dr. Lowe was phenomenal during this time because, you know, the pandemic could not have taken place at a more, the time that it happened at just like this. It was like a quiet storm that was just brewing. Our nation was faced with a lot of unrest, right? People were very maladjusted around some of the things that were happening in our urban inner city communities, right? And it wasn't a good thing, but these things were happening. And I think what happened is the pandemic exacerbated and amplified some of the things that were happening in urban inner city spaces. And then we had someone like Dr. Lowe, a person who's very versed around diversity and equity. And he would pull groups of teachers to the table and have conversations with them around what this means, this moment in time, and how do we navigate and negotiate this space that we're now living in. And by having a person by the likes of a Dr. Lowe, it helps to ease people's mind. It gives us greater context. So we started to really leverage our human and intellectual capital. We started communicating more than we ever communicated before. We started collaborating in ways that we had never collaborated. Now, what we have to do, David, is we have to keep this same synergy when school starts back. We can't have just this one moment and allow this one moment to just be like this one iteration of what we're doing. This has to be, as Dr. Ray says, a new thing. So right now, what we're preparing to do when students enter the building, we're doing a new thing. And that's what the pandemic has forced us to do, is a new thing in service to children.
Very good. Hey, if you're listening out there, this is when I think about these two great leaders, I think about individuals who are decisively engaged in the community. So we can talk about things that aren't necessarily in the traditional wheelhouse of their path. And that's where I want to bring the next question. Pastor Smith, earlier in your bio, I mentioned your focus on economic disparities. And I guess the counter to that would also be educational disparities, Rodney. When you take those two extremely macro factors in our society and you marry them up with the pandemic, talk to us about the impact of COVID with economic disparities, educational disparities, and what role reopening plays in those narratives with economic and educational disparities.
Well, David, obviously we knew such disparities always existed. Obviously, COVID-19 exacerbated those, and to some degree revealed to others in our community just how wide the disparity was. One of the ways that came true, say with our group of ministers and pastors, was we had to work with the church health to, when testing was going on, to identify those who were positive and who needed to be quarantined. Well, it's easy for some to be quarantined for 14 days when they can be paid. But most of the people that we were dealing with, we had to set up something because they were not going to be paid. It was not easy for them to take off if they were in the store, warehouse, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had to come up with strategies whereby we could make it easier for them not to be tempted to go to work while they were contagious. And then we put a team together where we would deliver food, we would deliver various things and check in on them with the different pastors. And for many of our people who were part of that delivery system, it was eye-opening because they realized that it's very difficult. These persons living paycheck to paycheck, which most people do, all of a sudden now you're going to go 2 weeks without paycheck. How are you going to get food, your utilities, your mortgage, your car note, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was really eye-opening for a lot of the people who were on our delivery team.
Good points. Rodney, same question when we think about the education disparities, economic disparities. One term that I was, got familiar with throughout COVID was the learning loss throughout the pandemic. Talk to us about that, but also the impacts of reopening when you think about learning loss and economic disparities.
Yeah, so when we think about the pandemic, David, I don't really think many people understand that some of the academic issues that plagued us, they were there all the time. So we talk about a pandemic, the conversation that we should be having, it should be around the endemic. because when we start talking about literacy rates and the like, these different variables have impacted urban inner city children for a long time. And so when we start talking about the income, we're talking about the income gaps and things like that. Um, I don't think that the pandemic exacerbated or amplified anything that we did not already know. We knew that these things were as they are. What we did see was we saw children literally become parents because parents had to work and you had older siblings they had to physically attempt to get online and learn themselves and have 3 and 4 siblings that they had to help to get online to learn as well. So when we start talking about the equity, the equity, and we start talking about the learning loss and all of these things, uh, it's much more deeper than a pandemic. It's much deeper than a pandemic. And we really are going to have to be far more intentional around literacy. But I also will say this, David, when we start talking about what happens in urban inner city school spaces, we have to understand that people of color, Black people, we're only 13% of the population in the United States of America, only 13% of the population. And when we really look at, we drill down, um, sometimes numbers don't tell a full story. There are a lot of our children who are thriving and they're surviving and they're excelling at a very high rate. I had a young lady at one of the high schools that I'm fortunate enough to be over during the pandemic, Douglas High School's valedictorian. A young lady made a 34 on the ACT, 34 out of 36.
Wow.
We don't celebrate those moments. We don't talk about the kids like this kid who made a 34 on the ACT. We talk about the other, the more, I guess, the more blatant and the more obvious issues that we discuss. So there are some students that may have lost during the pandemic, but there are some students that were able to thrive and survive during this pandemic as well. So what we're going to do is when school starts back, we're going to put systems in place to assess where they are and build the capacity of those children where they are and move them beyond where they are right now. So I have a belief that that was not a loss. You know, all things happen for a good reason. It was not a loss. It was just it was a situation in the moment that forced us to be still and really look at what's happening around us. And now that we know, so I'll give you this, David. So I have a mentor right now, and my mentor told me that there are 3 things that we need to know about this game that we call life. He said the first thing you need to know is know the rules of the game. Know the rules of the game is number 1. We know what the pandemic brought. We know what the outcome of the pandemic was. We know what all of the everything about the pandemic. So know the rules of the game. Number 2, know the score. We know how long we've been in a pandemic. We know what the pandemic did to us. But the last thing that he told me in those 3 rules is know how much time you have left on the clock. So if we take this lesson and if we learn from this lesson, and if we know the rules of the game, if we know the score, and if we know how much time we have left on the clock, we can actually take a situation that very easily could have defeated us and we can turn this around and we can leverage this and use this as an on-ramp for the things that we're going to do moving forward.
Agreed. Facilitator's privilege right now, Rodney. I want to stick with you. You know, there is so much focus on negativity in our society, but even more specifically around what's happening in our schools. You mentioned something that was extremely positive with the young lady, and even earlier with the percentage of young people showing up for the test. Give me a couple of other examples, because every time I hear it, you know, you wonder, where are these stories? Where are these positive aha moments? Where do they live? So talk to us, share a few more stories with us.
Well, I don't know, David, that I have like a ton of stories, but when I tell you, being able to just attending graduations and seeing the scholarship money that schools received, there's a huge disparity gap. So hypothetically, I have 4 high schools that I'm responsible for, I'm working directly with. And maybe at one school, not to call a name, the total scholarship offerings perhaps may have been like $3 million in scholarship money. Where you have this one young lady at this one school that had a total of like $6 million worth of scholarship money for her. So the question then begins, we have to start asking now that people are giving us these fiscal, right? The money. They're giving us the money. So we've been blessed to get a grant. So we have extra money. Like we have lots of additional money. So we're going to be able to get lots of additional resources. But the question has to be, David, when the resources are gone, the additional dollars are gone, have we put systems in place that will allow us to be stable and to thrive and survive long after the dollars are gone? So that's what we're doing right now, even as we prepare to use this extra money. And we're thinking about, like, are we going to invest our money in resources? Are we going to invest our money in human capital? What is going to be our best return on investment for children? And we really think so. Now we even have what we're calling highly specialized. We have highly specialized teacher assistants. So, like from grades K through 2, we're going to have an additional set of hands in the form of a teacher assistant working with all of our teachers. Like it's almost like some schools, based on the size of the schools, some schools will have as many as 7 highly specialized assistants in there with the teacher, working side by side with teachers, whatever students need. If it's working with them on flashcards, if it's working with them on word parts, if it's really intervening and monitoring their progress and looking at what their data said before the pandemic and looking at what their data is saying now. Because what we have lurking in our district is we have what's called a 3rd grade commitment. And all children will have to meet certain criteria in order to be ready for this 3rd grade commitment. So we've not relaxed any of our expectations. Like we know that the world is going to continue to rotate on its axis. Life is going to keep happening. So we now have to make adjustments so that our children will be prepared for things to come. So although, yeah, this was a very egregious moment, I acknowledge that I experienced loss during this time too. But at the end of this pandemic, we have to know that we put systems in place that are going to allow our students to truly return stronger mentally, return stronger academically, and return stronger just cognitively. All of this has to happen.
I agree. I think about it now. We've entered officially into the real talk zone of the discussion. So I want to kick it to Pastor Smith. You know, when we talk about COVID, we talk about the pandemic, but just as a society, there are many pockets that are deeply divided and things become very polarized. I witnessed firsthand your ability to speak with a certain level of civility, to be problem solving and solution oriented. Give us some advice when we're tackling throughout the pandemic and even beyond these very difficult textured discussions, how we can still maintain our civility in discourse and working our way through it. Pastor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think it starts with intentionality, whether that's with one other person or with a group, to have these intentional, courageous, candid conversations. I think that's very important. The other thing that is necessary is, we hear the term listening and active listening a lot, but it really cannot be overestimated, the importance of active listening, where you are listening to a person to hear their heart, to hear their head, their passions, not preparing your answer or rebuttal, but actually really listening. And part of active listening is asking questions, creating a safe enough space to where you can actually ask questions that you may not have asked before, particularly of another ethnicity or another age. So I think the intentionality is important, and creating a safe enough space where candid conversations can actually be had. And you mentioned the word civility. I think people, when they realize that we're going to have a civil conversation, it'll be uncomfortable at times, but if you set that expectation, I think people will be surprised at how open people will actually be. So I think those are very important.
One of the things that I take with me in business, and regardless of what avenue in my life, Pastor Smith, is something that you often say to the congregation. I would imagine that Rodney would agree. you always make sure that you say you are welcomed and wanted.
Yeah.
Talk to us behind just the ethos of letting individuals know, whether we're dealing with return or whatever in our life, that they are welcomed and wanted. And how do we deploy that in other areas?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Uh, as I do say to the congregation and to others, there's an invisible sign in every church, or really every organization, but since I'm a pastor, there's an invisible sign in every church that says you're wanted. These days, you know, people can go into any church that they want to and walk into it with respect to denomination, ethnicity, etc. But there is a difference between being welcome, saying you're welcome, and wanted. Saying you wanted, and even going further, saying you needed, means that we in this space, in this congregation, have a deficit. And we are not everything that we can be without you. And so you not only are saying you're welcome, but you're beyond that, you're wanted, but then you're actually um, looking at the assets that people actually bring to make you whole. And when you're doing that, it does require you actually having these honest conversations and allowing people to bring assets to you that you didn't have. Otherwise, you're really saying that we are whole. All we need you to do is just assimilate into, or rather acculturate into what we already have. You really don't have that much to offer. So you really do have to make sure that you are inviting people to feel wanted. And that means seeing people that look like you in terms of ethnicity and in terms of age, and doing things stylistically that the masses can actually relate to, as opposed to just one particular genre.
I think that's fantastic and a powerful message. You know, even as we think of protocols and the tactics around reopening or returning, however that may look like, you know, I think the given is um, individuals are wanted. But I think that the challenge sometimes is, can you make individuals, team members, family members feel welcome? And so your next step, not only just welcome, but needed as we move forward. All right, we've got a few minutes left. I want to end positively. Not to say that we have not been positive. We definitely have been very informative, encouraging, and insightful for sure. But Rodney, I'm gonna go with you. Talk to us about some of the things you are encouraged about, some of the things you are optimistic about as we look towards the future with respect to reopening. If you don't like that question, Rodney, you can just say what you want to say for about 30 to 45 seconds.
Okay, I will say this as we think about returning. I just really love just the whole our mantra as a district, reimagining 901. And so when we say reimagine, that means that means to do something again. We imagine school to be a certain way. We imagine the world to be a certain way. But how will it look now as we reimagine 901? And I'll leave with this. We're now in a space in the SES division of our district where whenever we meet, we end all of our meetings with a victory roar. And this is Dr. Ray is very passionate about our victory roar. And our victory roar says that together we must believe. Together we will achieve. Together we are reimagining 901. So we have to have a victory roar right now. We can't be defeated or deflated by what has taken place. We have to do a new thing. We have to reimagine educating children in urban inner city spaces. We have to reimagine education in this Memphis division of Tennessee and the state of Tennessee.
Well said. And I'd be remiss if I did not give big kudos to Dr. George Ray and the entire team for their work in navigating not only throughout the pandemic, but beyond. I know that it's, to say the least, Rodney, you and I have talked about it, it can be thankless work at times, pleasing and making sure that all constituencies are served, but you all at times make it look easy. We know it's challenging, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Pastor Smith, leave us with some thoughts, What are we looking for to be optimistic about as we move forward in the future? And I'm gonna just say amen in advance before you even give us remarks.
Well, you know, that old saying that necessity is the mother of invention, that's the time that we're in. Paradigms have changed. I would just leave with the audience one word that we can look at positively, and that's innovation. Innovation and creativity. This has given us an opportunity to look at things through a different paradigm, and that makes it exciting for me. Churches have had, and we have to look at how do we do funerals differently? People who can no longer gather together. How do you really express yourself and loved ones by looking at doing funerals different, doing worship different, virtually, being online. So I would leave the one word: innovation, innovation, innovation. This is an opportunity to do that. A lot of people also have discovered because they have been laid off or the company is downsized, they've had to innovate and remake themselves and discover that, you know, I'm not stuck in this profession that I was in. I have time now to look at relearning, and as Dr. Rodney said, reimagining, and they're going into different professions. So all of that has to do, I think some of the positive outcome of this pandemic is innovating and recreating ourselves.
Fantastic. You know, since we're in this new space, instead of touch 3 people, let's say text 3 people, innovate. We could even go reimagine. How about we text 3 people that? What about that, Pastor Smith? Well, it's been fantastic, encouraging, inspiring. I hope that you have had half as much fun as I have sitting with these 2 stalwarts in our community. Joselle has given me the 2-minute hook here. Please feel free to leave some comments and thoughts in the chat. This has been amazing. I truly have enjoyed it. Tomorrow we've got another slate of fantastic topics, including our hot topics. I hope that you all come back. We hope forward to see you. We know we'll have a lot of AutoZoners there participating in hot topics. And you know, before I close out, I'd be remiss also if I did not thank MMBC, Joselle Booker, and her entire team for putting on the EDF, but beyond that, what they do each and every day for the entire community, not just the minority community, but the entire community. So thank you so much, Joselle, MMBC. Thank you.